The South China Sea is witnessing militarization and unilateral claims by China. Any conflict in the seas will have a devastating impact on the economies of the region. India and others are pushing back. Good evening, everyone. I welcome you to our show, It Matters. Here we bring to you the issues that affect you as a global community. Just today, the US has asked the Chinese government to shut down its mission, its consulate in Houston, Texas. There is going to be a response from China as well, a retaliatory response, but it kind of gives you an idea of where the world is going as we move forward. Today, the issue we're checking on is very closely linked with how the globe is reacting to China and what China has been doing. So specifically the South China Seas, how many nations are pushing back against what they call as Chinese aggression. India in particular is in direct conflict with China, not only on land up in the north, but at sea as well. The Indians say the Chinese have been encircling them for a while now. The concept is called string of pearls. And also the South China Seas, they are in direct conflict. India's biggest concern is the Chinese movement and control in the region of what China calls the 9-dash line, a U-shaped line drawn by Chinese government in 1947. A dotted line without specific coordinates claiming all the islands in South China Seas. If China continues to push and occupy the islands, it will come too close to India. And that's one of India's worries. The 9-dash line is a figment of imagination of China, as they call it. And if it has been rejected by international tribunals for a while now. South China Seas is what is described as a global common, which means that these are international waters. It's for commerce, open doors to all countries in the Asia Pacific. It's a route to be able to do business with Asia Pacific. The world has respected international waters for a while. But the spread of China and some of its aggressive moves against the Philippines, Vietnam, even Indonesia, and of course India, has the world questioning whether the Chinese respect the whole concept of free trade using international waters. China's constant building of island defense bases is considered aggressive and expansionist. The world lacks trust, really, when it comes to China. They don't think that China, once it's rooted in South China Seas, will be able to respect the global community and how it's operated for a while. So why China wants it? If you look at the map, China wants to dominate the trade route for its imported oil flow from the Middle East. Basically, it wants to deny access to the SCS region, as it's called as well, the South China Seas region, to foreign military and trade shipments. The SCS region may contain large oil and gas reserves, and China wants to be the sole proprietor of that. Now, why is India so concerned about the Chinese aggression in the South China Seas? India individually has always patrolled the waters as far as the Strait of Malacca and has always looked for a safe region for doing business. Under the Act East policy of India now, the outreach to the region is being crammed by what they call as the expansionist approach of China. Now, joining us today to take forward this discussion is Captain D.K. Sharma. He's the former naval PRO for the Indian Navy, and he's also a strategic affairs consultant at Bharat Shakti. Also joining me is Mr. Salvatore Babons. He is an American sociologist, associate professor at the University of Sydney, and a columnist. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Let's talk a bit about, from your perspective, Mr. Babons, how do you see the Chinese operating in the South China Seas region? We'll stay specifically around South China Seas. We'll touch the others, but tell me, when you first look at the moves that China has been making, how do you look at them?
Well, China, of course, has been building islands to try to solidify its control of the China Sea. That's usually described as an anti-access area denial strategy. The idea being that by these islands and setting up its, China can effectively prohibit other countries from using the South China Sea. I think the narrative that there's lots of oil there or valuable fishing, well, it's true to some extent. The reality is that the economic resources of South China Sea don't justify the kinds of resources China is putting into controlling it. Its bid for control is really all about politics and military power, not really about the resources from the sea. And that's very visible even when we look at China's so-called fishing fleets patrol the South China Sea. Well, actually, I even said patrol myself because that's what they're doing. They're not really fishing in the South China Sea. They are Coast Guard in disguise patrolling the South China Sea. China wants China Sea for one reason, and from its perspective, that's security. From the rest of the world's perspective, that's militarization.
Captain DK Sharma, let me bring you in here. You served in the Indian Navy for a while and you were the spokesperson of the Indian Navy. Tell me, what are the kind of challenges the Navy faced in the South China Seas when it comes to China?
First of all, good evening to you, Rohit, and thank you for calling me to your show. What we have seen of China is, I will compare it with how we, conduct in the Indian Ocean region, and then we will take it down to South China Sea. As you have very rightly brought out, that they have made an imaginary line, the nine dash line, and now all the islands they are usurping. And you have also seen that they have been gradually militarizing the islands, and they have made they have put their radars, they have made airstrips, and they have also put now missiles and guns. That is what we gather from the open source intelligence. So, what is their idea? The idea is to deny all the smaller nations over there, whether it is Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Taiwan, Japan, Hong Kong, anybody and everybody, they just want to shoo them away from there. And by the way, these are all global commons, as you have given in your introduction. Global commons means that all this is natural resources, and as per the UNCLOS, United Nations conventions and laws of the sea, you have a right up to a particular place, whether it is 200 nautical miles, and then you have imaginary lines, which is called the International Maritime Boundary Lines. So, in that, up to a particular line, you have all the right over the natural resources. You can explore or whatever rich, whether it is oil rich, mineral rich, gas rich, all that falls into your kitty. But now you see what China is doing, whether it is the Vietnamese or what the professor was saying, that the maritime militia, which is coming over there, they hit the boats, they sink their boats, and whether they go to the courts, they go to the international courts, and whatever judgments come, China just debunks them. They are not honoring anything. So, what is the end game? End game is that today the democracies, the biggest democracies of the world, led by US, have now taken a stance and given statements that these are global commons, and this kind of might is right business will not happen. And that is why you saw in the last 1 month the US Navy sending the carrier strike groups over there to just reassure the like minded navies and the like minded nations that we are here, and we will ensure that whatever is legit to you will be given, and also a message to China that this high handedness and expansionist kind of attitude will not work anymore. Now, coming back to Indian Ocean, if you recollect from 2008 onwards, China has been sending their ships in the garb of anti piracy. Whereas the whole world knows the efforts put in by Indian Navy over the last decade plus, we have ensured that there is no case of piracy happening in the SLOCs. And SLOCs is sea lanes of communication through which the trade is flowing, and it is flowing, and we very proudly say that we have maintained the SLOCs unhindered. Economics for anybody, no stopping of trade, nobody troubling you, no piracy, no smuggling, no drug trafficking, no human trafficking. This kind of a responsibility India has taken for the world, from where 80% of the energy needs of the world are flowing crisscross, east to west, west to east, whether it is the exports which they do or whatever imports and the gas and the natural resources, oil, crude, which is coming. We have ensured it, and our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, has already announced in the World Fora that we will ensure security and growth for all in all this region. Now, what is the reason for Chinese people to come here? And last 4 or 5 years, they have been sending their research vessels. They have been, mapping the waters of Indian Ocean. So there is some reasons. There is some design. That is what Professor was saying. That are they, first securing the South China Sea, and then they want to go to the second island chain, and probably they have made their bases in Hambantota, Djibouti. They wanted to take
That's right.
over a part of Maldives. Then they went to Gwadar. So this string of policy, which Rohit you brought out, they wanted to activate that. And if you see in the Chinese white paper, they want to declare themselves as the superpower by 2049. But somehow their designs went awry in the backdrop of this pandemic. They thought that they will be able to push their agenda, and that is what they did in Ladakh also, in the northern heights of India. They did some kind of a trick, which was detected by us, and now we have reached a kind of a stalemate. They are still not agreeing to the de-escalation and
Right.
disengagement. So that is what we are looking at very closely, and also this messaging which is going, the biggest exercise which we did with the US Armada, which was led by USS Nimitz, the Carrier Strike Group 11.
Right.
It is a messaging that this high-handedness and this kind of an attitude that we don't care two hoots for anybody will not work. The
So,
democracies of the world are coming together.
sure. So the Chinese-Indian conflict also has the Americans heavily involved in it. The Americans obviously have massively been pushing back on China for the last, I would say, 15, 17 years now. And when we see where we stand today, it's primarily because the US China relationship at some places fallen out. India, which was not part of the US, if I want to call it the alignment movement, is now a party to the whole exercise because India sees a US as a partner to its outreach. And China certainly stands alone at some place. The only two countries that support it wholeheartedly is Korea and Pakistan, North Korea and Pakistan, I should say. And then there is outside support from Iran, which again is an enemy of the United States. The Russians add a little bit of support, but again, it's a very outside cursory support, if I want to call it that. But if you look at this whole region, China wants to have access to Europe, and that's why it's been pushing on India from the north, continuing to put pressure, and then continues to operate in South China Seas. Captain D.K. Sharma brought out Djibouti. It's on the edge of the African location from where they want to have incursions into the Middle East. They obviously have, been putting a lot of pressure on Maldives, Sri Lanka. They've had massive challenges. They first, took contracts for a port, and now they pretty much are in control of that port at Hambantota. So there has been dramatic movement by the Chinese, and India is very, very concerned on how this is going to work. But the Americans obviously have assured India that they stand with India, and in fact, the Americans came out and said it that if the Chinese don't understand, they're going to be so closely linked with us in South China Seas as we are patrolling. They come too close to us, there will be an altercation. There may be a small accident as well. A U.S. general came out and said a few years ago, and then lo and behold, in a few months, we saw a small little accident between the US and the Chinese, and they both played it down, but there have been challenges. Salvatore, can you explain to me, is this a created war? If many accuse the US of creating this war as well, or it's both pushing at each other for control of the South China Seas, and the US feels India is a good partner for having it as a global common, while the Chinese don't understand that concept too well.
The key difference between the American and the Chinese position on the South China Sea is that the United States is not in any way attempt to control the South China Sea. The goal of the United States is simply to keep that sea and all seas open. It's nothing directed against China. Any other area of the world where sea lanes are closed, the United States literally steps in to assert the freedom of navigation. China, on the other hand, is trying to make it a Mare Nostrum, a new inland sea of China, and that really is a change in the status quo. For the last, well, millennia, South China Sea has been the high seas. It has been an open area for anyone in the world to use, a global commons, as you put it. China is unilaterally stepping in to change that, mainly because it believes it can, not because it has any real right or need to do so. China certainly doesn't have to fear any kind of invasion across the South
Mhm.
China Sea. Who would invade, and for what? This isn't something that threatens Chinese security. Yet, China is a totalitarian regime. It has many internal threats to its own security. It has a lot of internal politics that are very opaque from the outside. It's hard for us to know often what's driving Chinese actions. I mean, you mentioned the string of Chinese across South Asia and even into Africa. Is it really conceivable that China garrison all of those bases and actually make use of them? I suspect not. So there's no real rational reason for China to be taking these kinds of aggressive acts. It's hard to see. Nonetheless, they are doing it, and the rest of the world really has to pay attention. You can't let a dictatorial regime simply take what it wants, even if it's obvious to outsiders what exactly it wants from all of this.
I lived in China for a while. I lived in Beijing as I represented the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And one of the things I always came across, the Chinese describe their country as Chunghua, which means the center of the world, and certainly very much a part of their understanding. But when we look at China and how it came about to where it's come, 1942, Hangzhou, the Americans supported the Chinese as it pushed back the Japanese military out of China as the fighting happened. And China since then obviously went back and forth with the United States and finally made the journey towards creating a much larger economy with the support of the United States very much, and then the rest of the world came along to help China build it. But I think there has been further movement from there, and the Chinese now feel that it's their century, it's their turn has come. The Asian century, as they call it, but when they talk about Asian century, it just means them and nobody else in that region. So I think that's one of the things which kind of, continues to pressurize them. But they've also seen in the last 5-10 years now, when the US has started pushing back on their agenda, that the economy has suffered internally. People inside China recognize it. I was again traveling through China in 2015. And one of the things I saw, people were very, very concerned of the Americans pulling out in terms of business. So I think that's where the strategy is. Captain D.K. Sharma, coming back to the South China Sea, what should India be concerned about right away? Is there something that is really, really pressing for India right now, and India needs to take action and stop something?
You see, the point which I want to make it very clear is that if China behaves the way they are behaving now, if they are not honoring the international laws, if they are not honoring the treaties which have been done in the past, and the way they are now making a new normal after the pandemic, these are all things of concern. And should they continue with this, then we will have to take some concrete actions in the Indian Ocean region, which will hurt them and which will hurt them economically, and then things might escalate. But the point is, India has no intention of doing like this, and that is why we are saying and we are harping. And our external affairs minister also made a statement 2 3 days back. You must have read it, that the status of global commons and freedom to navigate, freedom to overfly, all these things have to be restored. And it has to be a peaceful living. Indian Ocean region, we say that we are here to guarantee you prosperity, safety, and everything. Safety, security, prosperity. What about, it should happen in the South China Sea also. The status of all the oceans are the same, whether it is the Pacific, whether it is the Atlantic, Indian Ocean, or for that matter, the South China Sea. It is, it is surrounded by so many littorals, and half of the countries are very good. Almost all the countries are very good friends of India. And we, being the biggest democracy, we are a kind of an example for all the smaller nations. And we have taken it on our own that we will provide all kind of help should there be a need. But now China can't behave like this. And with this, whatever happenings over the last 2 3 months, it has seriously brought in everything under a question mark. And I don't know what is going to be the future, but the messaging is correct. India has taken a stance. US has taken a stance with India, and the next Malabar, we are probably going to involve the next biggest democracy, that is Australia, also with us. And all this, let me tell you, all this is for peace in the area. In the Indo-Pacific region, everybody has to exist. Everybody should operate together, and it should be, unhindered. It should not happen. This is my area. This is your area, and all this
Right.
doesn't work.
Right. Salvatore, you're based in Sydney in Australia. Tell me Australia's perspective. In Australia, certainly, we've spent a lot of time in Japan when the Japanese, the Australians, the Americans, and the Indians were coming together in the quadrilateral. Explain to me, what kind of steps is Australia willing to take? Is Australia committed to this quadrilateral partnership and making sure it pushes back, which means economic sanctions and things like that?
Well, this is very controversial in Australia. There's strong opinions on both sides of the debate. There seems to be now an opinion hardening in Australia against China. That is new. That's really changed in the last 12 months ago. We actually heard prominent Australians, politicians and business leaders arguing that Australia really should choose China over its alliance with the United States. And all of that kind of rhetoric has disappeared in the wake of China's aggressive actions in the South China Sea and elsewhere. Yet, even now, there is some reluctance to partner more broadly in the region, and in particular with India. There's a debate going on right now in the Australian media over whether or not Australia fully respects Indian democracy, whether Australia wants to take sides in the China conflict, or just try to stay out of it and repair its own relations with China to try some of the trade, especially services trade, that it's lost during the coronavirus epidemic.
So I think globally, economies are under tremendous pressure, and one can understand. For example, when it came down to Canada, when it was the Iraq operation, Canada had a certain perspective that we shouldn't get involved. And I think that kind of an approach takes precedence sometimes, because you have to respect, at the end of the day, the population of your nation. But in a situation like this, where China begins to pressurize the South China Seas, and then obviously the rest of the partnership that the Australians have with the Americans also begins coming under pressure. Do you think the Australian side will then fly in with the Japanese and the Americans and the Indians, or do you think they'll still play the balancing act?
Well, let's face facts. Australia is not a substantial naval power. Japan and India are both important regional naval powers that hold their respect sea lanes in their areas. Australia does not have that kind of capability. Australia's participation, if it comes to pass with the upcoming Malabar exercises, would mainly be symbolic. It would be Australia taking a stand with other democracies, with fellow democracies, against totalitarianism and unilateral aggression on the part of China. Now, frankly, I think Australia should take that stand, but I have to always remind people I may live here, but I'm not Australian, so I can't really tell Australians what to do. I hope they will take that stand, because it's symbolic. Even if Australia doesn't have the power to make a decisive intervention in an area like the South China Sea or the Indian Ocean, nonetheless, simply by being there, Australia sends a message about values. That's what all of this is really about. There's not going to be a carrier war across the South Pacific in our lifetimes, but values do matter, and countries in the region do see what other countries do and pay attention to these sorts of values that we telegraph. If they see democracy together, that democracies are firm, that democracies are on the rise, they're more likely to join us in that democratization against Chinese militarism.
Captain D.K. Sharma, we are reaching the end of the show. A closing statement from you in terms of what needs to happen.
I would only like to add something to what the professor was saying. You see the developments in the last 2 months, or maybe last 6 months, how the two democracies, that is India and Australia, have come together. As recent as last month, when the virtual meeting took place between the Prime Minister of India and Scott Morrison, we have signed a comprehensive strategic partnership with Australia. And the basis of that is, once again, safety, security, peace, and prosperity in the region. So we are not saying that we are going to, invade some country or third country. We are only going to ensure that things happen as they are by the laws. It should not happen that a stronger country or a economically stronger country is now throwing its weight behind it, because all this whatever has happened, the string of pearls, if you see, it had a design. It had a kind of a geo-economic pressures on all these smaller countries. And what has happened in the end, the area or the real estate or the ports have gone to China for 100 years lease. So it was never designed like that. They said that they will develop a particular thing, and they pumped in so much of money over there, and now the debt is so much that they have taken it for next 100 years. So all these kinds of designs are not there when India or Australia or US or Japan are talking. So we are coming together as credible democracies and credible navies who would not allow the expansionist or assertive kind of a role which China is playing. And I think we have put brakes on it, and only time will tell how will it pan out. But let me tell you, this is not going to roll back. This is only going to go from strength to strength. Thank you.
I think it's not an easy job. And so, Salvatore, closing statements, and then I'll close the show.
I just like to remind people that China is not necessarily as strong or irresistible as outsiders like to very British regime pursue these grand designs. It is pursuing the grand designs. Don't relax and don't be complacent, but also don't be and have the democracies can and will succeed.
The reality is China is not a democracy. The reality is that China has tremendous amount of political pressures inside, and its operational style is very different. The only countries that will possibly go along with China are the ones who have similar strategies and structures. So the rest of the world, the democracies of the world, I think, stand together. Global commons must be maintained. We must have a peaceful existence, and that's the way the world wants it to be. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me for the show. Salvatore, Captain DK Singh, Sharma, sorry.
DK Sharma.
I appreciate it. DK Sharma, I appreciate it. And I think this conversation is not going to stop. It's going to continue going on. And I think the world is going to continue to assert itself. And thank you for joining It Matters.
Thank you.
Thank you.